Why was everyone watching her like that? Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell adjusted her medic patch for the fifth time that morning, a nervous tic she'd developed since joining the 7th Special Operations Medical Unit. Maybe it was the heat, or maybe it was the pressure. Either way, her hands wouldn't stay still. The Afghan sun beat down on forward operating base Condor, turning the air into a shimmering haze of heat and dust. Around her, soldiers prepped gear, checked rifles, and tightened vests with the kind of focus that came only from those who had seen too much, too young. Sarah was 28, 2 tours in combat zones behind her, enough blood and loss to stain a lifetime, and yet here she was again, starting over. Because this place wasn't just another deployment, it was a crucible. 50 candidates had arrived for training. 20 remained. The rest had either washed out or been quietly told they didn't have what it took to work alongside America's elite. And among those who remained, Sarah Mitchell stood out, not because she wanted to, but because she couldn't blend in if she tried. Mitchell front and center. Colonel William Mitchell's voice tore through the morning like a rifle shot. Heads turned. No relation, but the shared name always earned whispers. And from the first day, the colonel made one thing clear. He might share her last name, but not his respect. Sarah jogged forward, heart pounding, posture rigid. She stopped before the man known across the Special Operations community as Iron Will. His uniform looked carved into him, every crease sharp, every medal earned. He'd seen combat on 3 continents and had the kind of stare that could strip paint off a tank. "Today begins Phase 2, Colonel Mitchell announced, scanning the small formation of remaining candidates. His voice carried that low, dangerous tone that told everyone this wasn't a morning speech. Medical skills alone won't save you in hostile territory. Not out there. Today, we see if you can keep people alive and keep yourself alive." The words sank deep. He let his gaze linger on Sarah just a second too long, long enough for everyone to notice. And there it was again, that silent judgment, the one that said she didn't belong, that she was smaller, quieter, softer. But Sarah stood her ground. "The scenario is simple," Colonel Mitchell continued. "You're mid-evac when your convoy's ambushed, your transport's down, wounded all around, hostiles closing in. You'll be evaluated on tactical movement, weapons proficiency, and medical intervention under fire. Fail any and you're out." No one moved. The only sound was the distant whine of helicopter rotors and the dry hiss of wind cutting across the sand. Sarah checked her gear, standard issue M4, sidearm, trauma kit, comms, spare mags. Everything was where it should be. She breathed once, steady. Because this was where she excelled, in the chaos between life and death. Still, something about today felt off. As she adjusted her vest straps, a familiar figure approached, Lieutenant Colonel Meryl Tangasdal, the legendary pilot. Her call sign was Stormlight, the kind of officer whose name whispered through hangars and ready rooms like a myth. "Lieutenant Mitchell," she said, voice calm but carrying that rare mix of warmth and authority. "Word of advice. The colonel isn't just testing your skills today, he's testing your resolve." Sarah nodded. "With respect, ma'am, I didn't come this far to break now." Tangasdal's eyes softened just a fraction. "Then be ready. There's a rumor Delta Force Command is observing today's drills. You'll want to give them something to remember." Delta Force. The words hit like a spark in dry brush. Before Sarah could reply, a thunderous boom ripped through the air, the first simulation charge detonating in the distance. Smoke rose against the cloudless sky. The exercise had begun. "Good luck, Lieutenant," Tangasdal called, stepping back. "And remember, in real combat, there's no reset button." Sarah moved to her position, heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of distant gunfire. Something's different about today, she thought. And she was right. The chaos hit fast. Smoke grenades blanketed the training field in gray veils. Shouts and bursts of simulated fire echoed through the compound. Sarah's world shrank to movement and instinct. She dropped behind cover, scanning for her assigned casualties. The first was a mannequin dummy with a chest wound simulation, a stand-in for a real soldier bleeding out. She applied pressure, sealed the wound, and shouted for extraction, all while returning bursts of suppressive fire toward advancing opponents. Mitchell's exposed on the south flank. Colonel Mitchell's voice barked through the comms, deliberately loud enough for others to hear. Let's see how she handles being the target instead of just patching people up. Sarah froze for a heartbeat. That wasn't part of the script. Then training took over. Rounds non-lethal but painful snapped past her head. She rolled, dragging her casualty behind a barrier, shoulder burning as simulated hits thudded against her vest. It was chaos, controlled for everyone else, but not for her. The opposing force seemed to be concentrating fire just on her. "This isn't training," she muttered under her breath. "This is a setup." 2 hours in, Sarah had treated 4 simulated casualties, neutralized 7 opponents, and was running on pure adrenaline. Sweat soaked through her gear. Every breath came ragged, but she didn't stop. Not when she could still hear soldiers calling for medics. Not when failure meant proving him right. Then, in the middle of it, silence. Colonel Mitchell appeared, boots crunching in the dirt, expression carved from stone. "Change of scenario," he said. Before she could respond, he reached down and ripped the medic patch clean off her shoulder. The sound cut through the noise. Everyone turned. "Your commanding officer is now wounded," he announced to the others. "Let's see who saves you, Mitchell, when you can't even save yourself." The humiliation hit harder than the sunburn or the bruises. He turned his back on her, walking away, exposing her position deliberately. Within seconds, fresh rounds slammed into the ground around her boots. One hit her shoulder hard enough to send pain shooting through her arm. She staggered, gritted her teeth, and kept moving. Pain meant nothing. Quitting wasn't an option. She switched her rifle to her left hand and kept firing, dragging the dummy to cover, working one-handed as she stabilized the patient. Her body screamed, but her training drowned it out. Breathe, assess, treat, move. That's what medics did. That's what she was, patch or no patch. By the 3rd hour, even the instructors had gone quiet. They weren't watching the scenario anymore. They were watching her. And then something shifted. A sound. A deep, concussive blast that didn't belong. One explosion, then another, louder, heavier. Real. For a split second, everyone froze. Then alarms erupted across the base. Colonel Mitchell's voice came over the comms, but this time it wasn't an act. "All personnel, we have a breach of the perimeter. Unknown hostiles on the training ground. This is not a drill." Sarah's blood ran cold. Smoke filled the field. Instructors scrambled for real weapons, and through the haze, Sarah saw them, silhouettes moving low and fast. 4 armed men, not part of the exercise. Her instincts locked in. She secured her training casualty and took up a firing position. Through her scope, she counted 3 insurgents with AKs and a 4th circling wide, toward the command post, where Colonel Mitchell was standing. He hadn't seen him. "Contact rear," Sarah shouted, breaking from cover, sprinting across open ground as the insurgent raised his rifle. The world narrowed. 1 heartbeat, 1 decision. She slammed into the colonel just as real bullets cracked through the air. They hit the dirt hard, rolled, and came up in a shallow depression. Colonel Mitchell's face was pale. His breath hitched once, then again. A spreading red stain bloomed under his vest. It wasn't paint. It wasn't part of the exercise. "Stay down, sir," Sarah ordered, voice shaking but steadying as she assessed the wound. It was high below the collarbone, angled down. Bad but survivable if she worked fast. "Mitchell," he coughed, struggling for air. You're not authorized to." "With respect, sir," she said, tearing open his vest. "Shut up and let me save your life." Her hands moved automatically, pressure dressing, seal, IV line, combat analgesics. Around them, real gunfire roared. Sarah didn't flinch. Because this was her world. The place between dying and living, where seconds decided who made it home. "Why didn't you run?" the colonel gasped, eyes glazing. "Because that's not what medics do," she said softly. "We don't leave anyone behind, even the ones who tried to break us." A round snapped past, hitting the dirt inches away. She shielded him with her body, returning fire one-handed, her arm trembling from pain. 2 shots, 2 kills. Her last magazine ran dry. Then salvation. A low hum building to a roar. Helicopter rotors. And then voices, crisp, decisive, controlled. "Delta, move." Black-clad figures poured through the smoke, moving with surgical precision. They swept through the chaos like shadows with purpose. At their lead, a woman, calm, sharp-eyed, composed under fire. Colonel Eileen Collins, the Delta Force commander. Sarah recognized her instantly. The way she moved, commanded, decided, it was unmistakable. When Collins reached her, she took in the scene with one quick glance. "Lieutenant Mitchell," she confirmed. Sarah nodded, breath ragged, hands still working on the colonel. Collins gave a slow nod, half approval, half respect. "Impressive work. Most people would have walked away after what he did." Sarah didn't look up. "He's still my co." The sound of the helicopter drowned out the rest. Dust swirled as the medevac touched down. And for a moment, just a moment, Colonel Mitchell's hand found hers. His voice was faint, but the words stayed. "I was wrong," he whispered. "You belong here." The blades thundered, the ground shook. But Sarah didn't hear anything anymore. Just the rush of blood in her ears, and the quiet, steady truth that would follow her forever. Strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it bleeds, fights, and keeps going anyway. They said the desert was silent at night. But at forward operating base Condor, silence had a different meaning now. It wasn't peace. It was aftermath. The wind swept across the empty training field where the chaos had erupted hours earlier, carrying with it traces of dust, smoke, and memory. The smell of burnt sand and spent rounds still hung in the air. And somewhere beneath it all, faint echoes of shouted orders and gunfire still lived in Sarah's mind. She hadn't slept. Not since they'd loaded Colonel Mitchell onto the helicopter, blood still warm on her gloves. Not since the look he'd given her, that small, almost imperceptible flicker of guilt and gratitude. That night, sitting on her cot in the dim light of her quarters, Sarah stared at her hands. They trembled slightly, even though she told them not to. Every medic knew that hands told the truth, when adrenaline faded, when the heart tried to forget what the mind couldn't. Her patch lay on the desk beside her, torn, frayed, the edges curled where his fingers had ripped it away. She could have thrown it out. But she didn't. Because somehow, that torn piece of fabric had become more than a symbol of humiliation. It was proof. Proof that she'd been tested, broken, and still hadn't yielded. Outside, the base was quiet, too quiet. They'd locked down after the breach. The insurgents had been neutralized, 3 dead, 1 captured alive. Intelligence units were already tearing through data, trying to piece together how anyone had gotten that close to a U.S. forward base without detection. Rumors spread fast in places like this. Some said it was an inside job. Others whispered it was a planned assassination, that someone wanted Iron Will Mitchell dead. But no one said what everyone was thinking. That without Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, there would have been more bodies on the ground. Morning came slow, painted in gray light and the dull hum of generators. Sarah reported to the field hospital. She moved like muscle memory, rounds, vitals, triage reports. The kind of quiet work that didn't demand words, only presence. Colonel Mitchell was stable. Bullet missed his lung, fractured his clavicle, punctured an artery but not fatal. He'd live. The irony didn't escape her. Lieutenant Mitchell. She turned. Colonel Eileen Collins stood at the tent entrance, arms folded, expression unreadable. Up close, she was everything the rumors said, calm, razor-sharp, and commanding without effort. The kind of leader whose silence said more than most people's speeches. "Ma'am," Sarah greeted, straightening instinctively. "At ease," Collins said. Her voice wasn't harsh, but it carried authority like gravity. "I read the incident report. Impressive work under fire." Sarah looked down at her gloves. "Just did my job, ma'am." Collins studied her for a long moment. Most people don't sprint into live fire to save the man who just humiliated them in front of an entire unit. Sarah's jaw tightened. "With respect, ma'am, I didn't think about that. I just saw a casualty." Collins nodded slowly, a ghost of a smile flickering at the edge of her mouth. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." She turned slightly, scanning the tent, as if assessing not just the patients but the soul of the place itself. "Delta Force operates differently, Lieutenant," she said quietly. "We don't just need medics who can patch wounds. We need people who stay human when everything else collapses." Sarah didn't answer, but her silence said enough. Collins gave a small nod. "I'll be in touch." And just like that, she was gone. That night, the wind carried the sound of helicopters coming and going. Somewhere far off, artillery rumbled, distant training or something else. Sarah lay awake again, eyes open in the darkness, her mind replaying everything like fragments of a broken film reel. The colonel's voice, the rip of her patch, the look on his face when the bullet hit. Her own breath steady, mechanical, as she worked through the chaos. Somewhere between exhaustion and reflection, she realized she wasn't angry anymore. Not at him, not even at the system that doubted her. She was just empty. And in that emptiness, a quiet strength began to build, not the kind that shouted or demanded recognition, the kind that waited, endured. Because real strength wasn't about standing tallest. It was about standing longest. 3 weeks later, the desert sun returned bright, unrelenting, indifferent. The base had resumed normal operations. Training continued. The world moved on. But for Sarah, nothing felt normal anymore. She'd been called to the command office that morning. No reason given, no explanation offered. When she entered, the first thing she saw was him. Colonel William Mitchell stood behind the desk, pale but upright, his uniform pressed, his eyes sharp. The faintest hint of a scar traced across his collarbone, a reminder of how close death had come. For a second, she thought he'd call her out again, maybe another test, another lecture about discipline or chain of command. Instead, he said, "At ease, Lieutenant." She obeyed silently. He studied her like a man seeing someone for the first time. "Your actions during the incident have been reviewed by command," he began. His tone was formal but softer than before. "Your situational awareness, medical response, and disregard for personal safety resulted in saving 5 lives." Sarah didn't move, didn't smile, didn't flinch. He continued, "Furthermore, your identification of hostile movement before our sensors confirmed breach prevented greater casualties. Command has authorized commendation." He paused, long enough for the air between them to thicken. "Colonel Collins of Delta Force has formally requested your transfer," he added. "They're assembling a specialized medical response team, field integration with Tier 1 operators. She believes you'd be an asset." Sarah blinked once. "Delta Force." Mitchell nodded. Her exact words were, "We need medics who don't break under fire." She didn't. For a man known for iron will, his next gesture was almost human. He opened a small box on his desk, removing a patch, not standard issue. the Special Operations variant, black border, red insignia, the mark of a medic who'd proven themselves under live fire. "This," he said quietly, "was supposed to be given at the end of Phase 3, but you've already done more than most do in an entire career." He stepped forward and offered it to her. Sarah hesitated. The last time a patch had been on that shoulder, it had been ripped away with contempt. This one was being returned with respect. She accepted it slowly, the fabric rough against her fingers. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" she asked. Mitchell nodded once. "Thank you," she said, voice steady, "for pushing me to the edge, even if your way of doing it was." She allowed herself the faintest smile, unconventional. Something flickered in his eyes, pride maybe, or regret. "Sometimes," he said, "the only way to see what someone's made of is to break what they think they are." He paused. "You didn't break." For a long moment, neither spoke. Just the hum of the air conditioner, the shuffle of papers, and the weight of everything unspoken between them. Then she saluted, crisp, final. He returned it. As she turned to leave, he called out softly, "Lieutenant." She stopped. "I was wrong," he said. "You belong in Special Operations." She didn't answer, didn't need to. Some acknowledgments didn't require words. 2 days later, Sarah stood before a new door. Delta Force Command, restricted access. A fingerprint scan, a coded keypad, a steel latch releasing with a low click. Colonel Collins herself greeted her. "Lieutenant Mitchell," Collins said, offering a hand, "welcome to your next chapter." Inside, the facility looked nothing like the dusty tents of Condor. This was precision, order, everything built for purpose. Collins led her through a corridor lined with black and white photographs, faces of men and women who'd served, some smiling, some solemn. "You're the first combat medic we've integrated directly into field ops," Collins said as they walked. "Not as support, as team. You'll deploy with operators, make real-time calls under fire, handle trauma before evac is possible. This isn't theoretical." "I understand," Sarah said quietly. "Good," Collins replied, "because out there theory gets people killed." They stopped before a reinforced door. Collins keyed it open. Inside, 6 operators stood waiting. They didn't salute, didn't stare. They just watched her, assessing. Collins stepped forward. "Team, this is Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell. She's your new combat medic." For a heartbeat, silence. Then one of them, a tall, bearded man with the calm posture of experience, nodded. "You're the one from Condor," he said. "The medic who saved Iron Will." Sarah didn't confirm it, didn't need to. Collins smirked. "You'll find she's not here because of who she saved," she said. "She's here because she never stopped." As the team dispersed to their prep stations, Collins turned back to Sarah. "We don't just save lives here," she said. "We change the course of history, and sometimes the most powerful weapon on a battlefield isn't a gun. It's the person brave enough to run toward the wounded when everyone else runs away." Sarah stood there, silent, grounded, breathing in the faint scent of gun oil and adrenaline. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was trying to prove anything. Because the patch on her shoulder wasn't just sewn back on. It was earned thread by thread, scar by scar. And somewhere deep inside, the girl who once doubted if she belonged in a world built to break her, finally knew she did. She could tell from the silence they didn't trust her. Not yet, maybe not ever. Inside the Delta Force training hangar, noise wasn't the problem. There were drills, commands, weapons checks. But beneath it all was a silence that said more than words. The kind that hung in the space between nods and glances, between soldiers who'd fought, bled, and buried together. Sarah Mitchell was an outsider. Not because she was new, but because she wasn't them. Every operator in the room carried invisible scars, the kind you didn't get from training. They moved with quiet certainty, No wasted gestures, no hesitation. Every step, every look had intent. And they watched her. Some curious, some skeptical, a few openly doubtful. She'd seen that look before. But never this close. The first week was orientation, or what Delta called orientation, which in truth was more like psychological demolition. No titles, no ranks, only capability. Collins made that clear the first day. Out there, she said, no one cares about your resume, only what you do when the world catches fire. Sarah listened, said little, watched everything. Her role wasn't support, not this time. She was being trained as a combat integration medic, part shooter, part healer, part moral compass in a world that often forgot what morality looked like. And from day one, she understood something vital here. Saving a life was sometimes the hardest decision of all. Her first test came sooner than expected. It wasn't announced, it wasn't formal. It began with a simple statement from Collins. Today, you'll run with Alpha Team. Sarah blinked, a live op. Training scenario, Collins clarified. But you'll treat it as real, minimal supervision. You move when they move. You act when they act. You hesitate, someone dies. Understood. Sarah nodded once. And that was it. The Black Hawk thundered through the night sky, its rotors slicing the air like blades through silence. Below, an expanse of dark desert stretched endlessly, featureless, empty, yet full of threat. Sarah sat between two operators, Ramirez, call sign Ghost, and a tall, stoic figure named Reed. Neither spoke. Their rifles rested across their knees. Their eyes never left the open door. Sarah kept her focus forward, heart steady. The headset crackled. Alpha 30 seconds. Collins' voice came through from the command relay. Calm, controlled, always steady. The operator beside Sarah smirked faintly. You ever fast rope before, Doc? Twice, she said. Once in training, once under fire. He chuckled. Under fire counts double. Good, she replied. I like extra credit. A few of the men exchanged looks, maybe a little impressed, maybe still uncertain, but they didn't tease her further. Because the next moment, the red light went green. And there was no more time to doubt. They dropped into darkness. The operation site was a mock-up, a compound built to replicate a hostage extraction under fire, but the realism was brutal. Pyro charges, sound effects, live fire blanks. Sarah hit the ground hard, knees bending, rifle up. Move, move. The team flowed forward like water, silent, precise, lethal. Sarah followed, eyes scanning, tracking positions. The air smelled of cordite and dust. Gunfire erupted from the mock enemy position. Shouts, flashes, chaos. She stayed low, covered angles, and when the call came, casualty, she was already moving. An operator went down, simulating a gunshot to the leg. Sarah was on him in seconds. Tourniquet, pressure, IV line, communication clear and calm. But the test wasn't medical, not really. It was psychological. Because when she glanced up, the rest of the team had moved on, deeper into the structure. She was alone. And that's when Collins' voice echoed in her earpiece. Decision time, Lieutenant. Follow protocol or follow instinct. Protocol said stay with the casualty. Instinct said move before you're left behind. For a heartbeat, she hesitated. Then she heard it, the faint simulated scream from the hostage area. She tightened the tourniquet, stabilized the vitals, and whispered to the mock casualty, "You'll live." Then she ran. Later, when it was over, when the smoke cleared and the hostages were secured, Collins reviewed the footage in the debrief room. No one spoke as the screen replayed the moment of Sarah's hesitation. The room was heavy with judgment. "Lieutenant," Collins said finally, eyes still on the screen, "you left your patient." Sarah's stomach tightened. "Yes, ma'am, to reach the hostages." And if it hadn't been a simulation? Sarah's reply came steady. Then I would have carried him with me or died trying. A pause. Then Collins turned the screen off. Noted. She didn't smile, but she didn't reprimand her either. And that somehow meant more than praise. Days blurred into weeks. Training intensified. Every drill pushed Sarah further. Endurance, weapons, field trauma, combat triage under simulated chaos. There were moments of doubt, yes. Times when her body screamed, when exhaustion threatened to strip her composure. But every time she remembered the sound of tearing fabric, that moment at Condor when she'd been humiliated, broken down and tested. And she refused to feel that way again. Reed, the tall operator, started to notice. "You don't quit," he said one night during post-training cleanup. "Can't afford to," Sarah replied, tightening her boot laces. He smirked faintly. Good answer. It wasn't friendship. Not yet, but it was respect. And in a place like Delta Force, that was rarer than gold. By the fourth week, Sarah was integrated into their rhythm. She still was one of them, not fully, but they no longer questioned her right to stand among them. That's when the first real mission came. Not training, not simulation. Real. It began with a briefing that felt different. No projections, no open room, just 6 operators and Collins at the head of the table. "Intel confirms a downed recon drone in northern Syria," Collins said. "It carried classified data, sensor intel, troop tracking algorithms. It cannot fall into enemy hands. We move fast, in and out before dawn." Sarah listened carefully, committing every detail to memory. "This is a 5-hour window," Collins continued. "Recovery and exfiltration only, but if contact is made, rules of engagement apply." Sarah glanced up. "What about civilians?" Collins' eyes met hers. "Collateral must be avoided, but priority is the data." Sarah hesitated, just a flicker. And Collins saw it. After the briefing, as the others left, Collins caught her eye. "Something to say, Lieutenant." Sarah took a breath. "Just wondering how far priority goes, ma'am, if it's between intel and lives." Collins studied her, quiet for a moment. "You'll find," she said finally, "that in our line of work those aren't always different things." Sarah nodded, but the words stayed with her long after Collins walked away. The night of the mission, the desert air was cold. Sarah checked her gear twice, then again, a ritual born of habit, not fear. Reed walked by, adjusting his vest. "Nervous?" he asked. "Always," she said softly. "Means I'm still human." He chuckled. "Good, out there you'll need that." She didn't ask what he meant. She'd learned soon enough. The helicopter touched down miles from the target grid. They moved silent, fast, a ghost line through the dunes. Sarah's world narrowed to footsteps, breath, heartbeat. Every sound mattered. Every decision carried weight. At the ridge, the compound came into view, low lights, guards moving, the faint hum of a generator. Collins' voice crackled through comms. "Target confirmed. Retrieve the core. Minimize exposure." They moved in shadows within shadows. Reed breached the outer wall with practiced ease. The team split. Sarah stayed center, her role to cover and treat. Inside, the smell of oil and metal filled the air. They found the wreckage. The drone's chassis was half buried in sand, half dismantled, data core missing. "Someone beat us to it," Ramirez muttered. And then came the gunfire. It wasn't staged this time. The rounds were real. Bullets tore through the night. Dust exploded from the walls. Sarah dropped to cover, instinct over fear. Reed returned fire. Ghost moved to flank. "Contact east side." Sarah's voice broke through the comms, calm but urgent. "Reed's hit, lower leg." She crawled to him under fire, sliding into the dirt beside his position. Blood soaked through his pant leg, not simulation, not paint. Real. "I got you," she said, tearing open her kit. "Don't waste time. he grunted, aiming over her shoulder, firing blind. "Shut up and let me work." She tied the tourniquet, injected coagulant, sealed the wound. Her heart hammered. Dust filled her lungs. Then footsteps, close. Too close. She swung her sidearm just as a hostile rounded the corner and fired. One shot, clean, final. Silence followed. For a moment, the world stopped moving. Then Colin's voice came through. All teams exfil now. They'd secured the data core from the enemy cache. Mission complete. But Sarah wasn't thinking about data. She was thinking about how Reed's pulse steadied under her hand. And how, in that moment, it wasn't about medals or orders or even success. It was about keeping one person breathing when everything tried to take that away. Hours later, back at base, Reed lay in the medical bay, stable. Colin stood by the door, arms folded, watching. When Sarah finally stepped out, covered in dust and sweat, Colin said softly, "You made the right call." Sarah looked at her. "I didn't think, I just acted." Collins nodded. "That's what leadership feels like, Mitchell. It's not logic, it's instinct sharpened by compassion." Then, almost as an afterthought, Collins added, "You passed your first test." Sarah blinked. "Test?" Collins' faint smile returned. "Every mission is one. You'll learn that soon enough." That night, alone again in the dim barracks, Sarah stared at her reflection in the small mirror by her bunk. The woman looking back wasn't the same one who'd arrived at Condor weeks ago. This one had eyes that had seen too much, but refused to close. She touched the patch on her shoulder, the one that had been torn, returned, and now reborn. And in the silence, she whispered to herself, "This isn't about proving anymore." It was about purpose. And purpose was something she'd die for. They called it a successful mission. But Sarah didn't feel successful. 3 days had passed since Syria. 3 days since she'd carried Reed out of that compound under a hail of bullets. He lived, the data core was recovered, the team came home. And yet, every time Sarah closed her eyes, she didn't see the victory. She saw the faces. The enemy she'd shot. The villagers who ran when the helicopters landed. The thin line between right and necessary. Because for the first time in her career, Sarah Mitchell realized saving lives wasn't always the same as doing the right thing. Inside Delta's forward facility, the atmosphere was calm on the surface, sterile halls, controlled lighting, polished steel. But beneath that calm was something darker. Everyone was moving faster now. Briefings at dawn, silent lunches, eyes that didn't meet hers for long. Reed was still recovering. He tried to joke about it. "Just a scratch," he'd said, grinning through the bandages. But she saw the tremor in his hands when he thought no one was looking. And she recognized it because her own hands did the same thing. The debriefing that morning was short, clinical, stripped of emotion. Colin stood at the front of the room, her voice steady as ever. Mission parameters met, 0 civilian casualties, data secured, 2 enemy combatants neutralized. Sarah felt something twist inside her. Enemy combatants. The term made it sound simple, clean. But nothing about it had been clean. The man she'd shot, he couldn't have been older than 20. He wasn't aiming when she fired. He just stepped into her line of sight at the wrong second. Her training said it was justified. Her conscience said otherwise. And now, sitting in the quiet of the debrief room, Sarah felt both of them arguing in her chest. Collins dismissed the team with a curt nod. "Good work. We'll regroup at 1900 hours." Everyone rose. Sarah didn't. "Not right away." Collins noticed. "Something on your mind, Lieutenant." Sarah hesitated, then said quietly, "Permission to speak freely, ma'am." Collins gestured for her to continue. "That target in the East Corridor, the one I neutralized, he wasn't armed when I fired. I confirmed that afterward." Collins didn't blink, and Sarah swallowed, and I pulled the trigger anyway. The colonel's voice didn't change tone. You followed procedure, engagement under threat proximity. You were protecting a wounded operator. Still, Sarah said, it doesn't feel right. Collins studied her, that unreadable gaze, sharp as glass. Feeling right isn't the same as being right. You acted to save a life. Don't confuse guilt with failure. Sarah's jaw clenched. And what if guilt, what keeps us human? Collins didn't answer. She just said, that's exactly why you're valuable here. And with that, she walked away. Later that evening, Sarah sat outside the hangar alone. The night air was cool. The desert stretched silent under the stars, wide and endless. Her rifle leaned against the wall beside her. Her patch caught the moonlight, that black and red insignia that had once meant pride. Now it felt heavier. You're thinking too loud, a voice said behind her. She turned. Reed limped into view, leaning on a crutch, grin crooked. Shouldn't you be resting? She asked. Shouldn't you? He sat beside her with the kind of casualness that only came from people who'd nearly died together. They didn't speak for a while, just the wind and the soft hum of generators in the distance. Finally, Reed said, You did good out there, Mitchell. She shook her head. I killed someone who didn't have to die. Reed leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You saved me. That doesn't make it clean. He sighed. You ever think maybe it's not supposed to be? Sarah looked at him, puzzled. Reed's expression softened. We tell ourselves war, about rules, about good and bad, but it's not. It's about survival, and survival's ugly. He turned to face her fully. The trick is learning to live with that ugliness, without letting it eat you alive. His words lingered long after he left. 2 nights later, Collins called her in. The colonel stood beside a digital map glowing on the wall. Red markers dotted across a mountainous region near the Afghan-Pakistani border. Intelligence from your last mission led us here, Collins said. Insurgent network, same group responsible for the FOB Condor breach months ago. Sarah froze. The same group that attacked the training field. Yes, we traced signal data from the captured insurgents' comms. They've resurfaced. Sarah's pulse quickened. So this is retaliation, Collins said simply, and closure. She handed Sarah a file. You'll deploy with Bravo 1 as primary medic, limited support, rapid extraction, minimal footprint. Sarah flipped through the pages, maps, coordinates, profiles. It was a strike op, a surgical hit designed to erase a threat before it spread. But one detail made her stomach tighten. Collateral risk, high, the file read. Civilians possibly present. She looked up. Ma'am, this is a populated area. Collins didn't deny it. We'll minimize casualties, but we can't let this cell regroup. Sarah's hands tightened around the folder. Permission to question mission parameters. Granted, Collins said. What if minimize isn't good enough? For the first time, Collins's gaze softened, not with sympathy, but something like understanding. You'll have to decide what good enough means, Lieutenant. That was the thing about Delta. There were no moral absolutes, only trade-offs that carved pieces out of you one at a time. The operation launched before dawn. They moved under moonlight, through broken villages and silent hills. Sarah's pack felt heavier than usual, not from gear, but from what she carried inside. Halfway to the target, they heard it crying. A child's voice. The team froze. Infrared confirmed it, 3 heat signatures near a hut on the edge of the compound. 2 adults, 1 small, non-combatants. Ramirez whispered, we can bypass left. Reed shook his head. Too exposed. We go through that route, we risk alerting the whole site. Collins' voice crackled over comms from Overwatch. Decide fast. All eyes turned to Sarah. Not because she was in charge. Because she was the medic. The one who was supposed to keep them alive, but also remind them who they were while doing it. Her throat tightened. "There's a family in there," Reed said quietly, "and 10 armed men beyond that wall." She hesitated. Then Colin's voice again, low and final. "Mitchell, make the call." The world shrank. Every sound, every heartbeat, faded into a single decision. Sarah whispered, "We bypass." "Copy," Collins said. They shifted left, avoiding the hut entirely, slipping past the shadows. No one spoke again until the objective was secure, the enemy eliminated, and the data recovered. But as the sun rose and the team prepared to exfil, Sarah looked back at the hut, at the faint movement of the curtain where a small face peeked through, wide-eyed and silent. And she realized something she would never forget. Sometimes mercy wasn't in saving lives. Sometimes it was in choosing not to destroy them. Back at base, Collins called her in again. The colonel's tone was calm, but her words carried weight. "You disobeyed operational efficiency to avoid a civilian zone." Sarah braced herself. "Yes, ma'am." "And in doing so," Collins continued, "you risked exposure, delayed extraction, and complicated coordination." Sarah nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Then Collins said quietly, "You also made the right choice." Sarah blinked. Collins folded her arms. "Leadership isn't about orders, it's about conscience. That's what separates soldiers from machines." She paused, watching Sarah closely. "Do you know why I brought you into Delta, Mitchell?" Sarah shook her head. "Because the world's full of soldiers who follow rules," Collins said. "But it needs a few who still remember why the rules exist." Sarah exhaled slowly, a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Get some rest, Lieutenant," Collins said softly. "You'll need it. The next mission won't test your body, it'll test your soul." That night Sarah sat in her bunk again, same dim light, same silence. But something was different. The guilt hadn't left. It had simply changed shape. Now it wasn't a weight pressing down. It was a compass pointing forward. She ran her thumb along the edge of her patch, tracing the black border, the red cross. It wasn't clean. It wasn't simple. But it was hers. She thought of Reed, of Collins, of the boy behind that curtain who would wake up to another sunrise. And she realized something that would follow her into every battle that came after. Courage isn't about running toward danger. It's about refusing to lose your humanity when you get there. There's a kind of quiet that only exists before something goes wrong. Sarah could feel it. That stillness before the storm, where every breath feels borrowed. They called it Operation Glass Veil. Officially, it was a hostage recovery. Unofficially, it was a race against time and conscience. 2 American aid workers had been captured by a splinter cell of the same insurgent network they'd hunted for months. The captors wanted exposure, not ransom. They were live-streaming demands, broadcasting threats. Collins' voice during the briefing was clipped, almost cold. "We have 36 hours before the deadline. After that, the hostages die or worse." The room was silent. Sarah listened, every muscle tight. Satellite images, heat signatures, guard patterns. The details unfolded like a story she already knew how to end, except this time she wasn't sure she wanted to read it. "Rescue and extraction only," Collins said. "But intel suggests one of the hostages is injured. That's where you come in, Lieutenant Mitchell." Sarah nodded once. "Any questions?" She hesitated. "Are they civilians?" "Yes." "And unarmed?" "Yes." Sarah's jaw set. "Then we bring them home." Collins' gaze softened. "That's the idea." But the way she said it, the way her voice lowered on idea, told Sarah that not everyone in the chain of command agreed. The team lifted off under moonlight. The helicopter blades cut through the cold Afghan air, carrying 7 people toward a place most wouldn't dare look at on a map. Sarah sat between Reed and Ramirez, her rifle cradled against her chest, her thoughts far from the noise. She wasn't thinking about danger. She was thinking about the human cost of survival, the invisible price no one listed in after-action reports. Reed nudged her arm. "You look somewhere else, Mitchell." She looked up. "Maybe I am." He smirked. "Don't forget to come back when the shooting starts." She almost smiled. "Don't give me a reason to patch you up again." The red cabin light flickered. The pilot's voice came over comms. "1 minute to target." Sarah closed her eyes. In the darkness behind her lids, she whispered a single sentence, not a prayer, but something close. "Let me bring them back." The landing zone was a dry riverbed, half a kilometer from the target compound. The team disembarked fast, boots hitting sand with muffled precision. Reed took point, Ghost followed. Sarah moved center, eyes scanning the perimeter. The desert night pressed around them, vast, suffocating, alive. They reached the first structure, low stone walls, a narrow entrance, dim light seeping from inside. "2 guards," Ramirez whispered, peering through thermal optics. Reed nodded. "Non-lethal if possible, we want noise control." Sarah's heart pounded in sync with their silent movements. 2 shadows dropped. 2 bodies went limp, quick, clean, efficient. Then came the signal, 2 short clicks over comms. "Entry." They breached. Inside smelled of dust, oil, and human fear. The hostages were there, tied, gagged, blindfolded. 1 male, 1 female, both bruised. The woman's arm was twisted at an unnatural angle. Sarah moved instantly. "Clear me space." She knelt beside them, cutting bindings, checking pulses, vitals. The man was conscious but dehydrated. The woman semi-lucid, in shock. "She's got a compound fracture," Sarah said. "Possible infection. I need a splint and fluids." Reed tossed her a kit. Sarah worked fast, gloves slick with sweat, hands steady. She whispered to the woman, "You're safe now, we're here." The woman's eyes fluttered open. "Are you American?" Sarah smiled faintly, "Something like that." Then movement. Gunfire. The wall behind them exploded in dust and concrete. "Contact north wall," Ramirez shouted. The team scattered into defensive positions. Sarah threw herself over the hostages, shielding them from the debris. Collins' voice over comms was sharp and immediate. "Extraction compromised. Mitchell status. 2 hostages alive, 1 wounded, we're pinned. Hold position. Reinforcements inbound, 3 minutes." "3 minutes is a lifetime," Reed muttered. Sarah met his eyes. "Then let's make it a long one." The firefight was short, brutal, deafening. Rounds tore through the walls. Sand and smoke filled the air. Sarah could barely see, but she could feel the panic in the hostages, the ragged breath, the trembling bodies pressed against her armor. She focused on that, not the noise, not the bullets, just the rhythm of human fear. Because that was her job, to keep the heartbeat going. When the dust finally settled, silence crept back like a slow tide. Reed called out, "Clear." The hostages were alive, the team intact. But something was wrong. Sarah's hand came away red. Not theirs, hers. A thin line of blood snaked down her arm from a graze near her ribs. She pressed it, ignored the sting. "Mitchell," Reed barked, "you're hit." "Nothing serious," she said. "Focus on them." He frowned but didn't argue. Because there were still gunshots in the distance, not close, but not far enough either. "Move." They carried the hostages out, half running, half dragging, every step an eternity. The sound of approaching vehicles echoed through the valley. Then salvation. The low hum of a helicopter. They loaded fast. Dust kicked up, swallowing them in chaos. Sarah stayed last, holding pressure on the female hostage's arm until the rotor wash almost knocked her off balance. Then Reed pulled her in. Doors slammed. The world fell away. Inside the helicopter, Sarah's gloves were slick with blood again, but not just from wounds, from choices. The female hostage clung to her arm, eyes wide with fear and disbelief. You came for us." Sarah looked at her, voice barely audible over the engine. "That's what we do." But even as she said it, part of her knew, not everyone got that promise. Back at base, the aftermath unfolded like always. Reports, debriefs, medical checks, silence. The hostages were alive, mission successful. The media would never know how close they came to being headlines. But Sarah couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the compound again. The walls, the fear, the sound of the bullet that had missed by inches. She kept replaying it, not the danger, but the choice she'd made when the woman's eyes opened and met hers. Because in that instant, she hadn't seen a mission objective. She'd seen a person. And she wondered how many soldiers still remembered to do that. The next morning, Collins called her in again. This time the colonel looked different. Not softer, but tired in a way Sarah hadn't seen before. "You did well," Collins said. "The hostages are stable, both will recover." "Thank you, ma'am. But there's something else." Collins handed her a folder, sealed, stamped confidential. Sarah opened it. Inside was a transcript, a single page. "Intercepted transmission," Collins said. "Same group, they're angry, you humiliated them, they're vowing retribution." Sarah felt a chill. "On who?" "On you," Collins said quietly, "by name." Sarah's stomach dropped. "Relax," Collins added, though her voice didn't sound convincing. "They don't know where you are, but we'll increase precautions." Sarah nodded slowly. "So this isn't over." "It never is," Collins replied. For the first time, the colonel's mask slipped just slightly. "I told you before. The next mission would test your soul. This one will test your resolve." Sarah studied her. "And if my resolve breaks?" Collins met her eyes. "Then I'll remind you why we fight in the first place." That night, the wind howled across the desert. Sarah stood outside the hangar, looking toward the horizon. The moon was high, cold, distant. Her side throbbed from the wound. She ignored it. In the silence, she thought about all of it: Condor, Mitchell, the insurgents, the hostages. It was strange. For all the pain, for all the fear, she didn't regret any of it. Because each scar, each decision, had carved something real inside her, something unshakable. She remembered something her father once told her, years before she ever put on a uniform. "Real courage doesn't come from being fearless, Sarah. It comes from being afraid and walking forward anyway." She smiled faintly, whispering to the wind, "Guess I'm finally learning, Dad." Behind her, the base lights flickered. A shadow moved, faint, distant, a vehicle slowing near the perimeter fence. She turned. 2 guards called out in Pashto, then gunfire. Sarah's instinct snapped into place. The quiet was over. The alarms blared across the base. Sirens, shouts, the unmistakable chaos of a breach. Sarah ran toward the sound, not away. Rifle in hand, vest half-buckled, hair whipping in the desert wind. Because this time, it wasn't a drill. And whoever was coming, they weren't coming for data or politics. They were coming for her. The first thing Sarah heard was the alarm. The second, gunfire. By the time she reached the perimeter, the night sky was on fire. Tracer rounds streaked like comets through the darkness, slicing across the sand. Delta Force wasn't supposed to be caught off guard. But this wasn't a random strike. This was revenge. The insurgent group that had vowed retribution had come fast, brutal and precise. They weren't testing the base, they were targeting one person. And Sarah Mitchell knew it. The first explosion hit the west wall. The blast knocked her off balance, showering her with dirt and metal. She rolled behind a concrete barrier, breath ragged, ears ringing. Around her, chaos unfolded, operators shouting orders, medics dragging the wounded, guards scrambling to defensive posts. The air smelled of burning fuel and blood. "Mitchell!" Reed's voice cut through the noise. He was already at the makeshift command post, firing short bursts toward the shadows beyond the wall. Sarah sprinted to him, rifle in hand. "What's the situation?" she shouted. Dozen hostiles breaching West Gate's small arms and RPGs. No air cover yet. Collins is coordinating evac routes. "Casualties." He grimaced. "Too many." Sarah's gaze shifted to the smoke-covered horizon, and for a second her heart stuttered. In the distance, figures moved with terrifying coordination. These weren't fanatics with rifles. They were trained, military trained. Something about it didn't fit. "This isn't just insurgents," she said. "Look at their formations, their spacing. They're moving like—" "Professionals," Reed finished grimly. "Yeah, someone's funding this." Another explosion thundered. The wall cracked, sending shards of concrete flying. Reed grabbed her arm. "We need to fall back to the secondary line." But Sarah pulled away, "Not without the wounded." "Mitchell, we don't have time." "We make time." Without waiting for approval, she sprinted toward the medical bay, toward the danger. The tent was chaos. Smoke, screams, the metallic tang of blood and antiseptic. A young corporal lay near the entrance, his uniform soaked red. Sarah dropped to her knees beside him. "Stay with me," she said, hands moving automatically, pressure gauze clamp. His eyes fluttered. Am I hit bad?" "You're fine," she lied. "You'll see your buddies at breakfast." He gave a weak laugh that turned into a cough. "You always lie this good, ma'am." "Only on Thursdays." He tried to smile and then passed out. She finished the seal, checked his pulse, moved to the next casualty. Her world shrank to movement, touch, sound. The ground shook again, another explosion, closer this time. Then her radio crackled. "Mitchell, fall back. We're losing the perimeter." "Negative," she replied, voice calm despite the chaos. "Still extracting wounded." "Damn it, Sarah." She cut the line. A shadow loomed outside the tent. Footsteps not friendly. Sarah froze. Then moved. She grabbed her sidearm and slipped behind a supply crate, just as the tent flap tore open. An armed figure stepped inside, weapon raised, scanning. Her pulse slowed. Her hand steadied. One shot. The man dropped. She exhaled once steady, then dragged his body outside. For a moment, the world went eerily quiet. Then she saw it, something metallic attached to his vest. Not a bomb. A transmitter. Her stomach dropped. They weren't trying to destroy the base. They were tracking her. She ran. Past burning vehicles, past fallen soldiers, toward the comms tower where Collins and the remaining operators had regrouped. She burst through the sandbag barrier. "They're not here for intel or supplies. They're here for me." Collins turned, her face streaked with dust. "What?" Sarah tossed the transmitter onto the table. "GPS tag. They're using it to track my position, probably tied to the Condor breach data." Collins grabbed the device, studying it. "You're saying—" "Someone sold them our movements," Sarah said. "They knew I'd be here." Collins didn't argue, she didn't have to. The truth hung heavy in the air. "Evac 10 minutes out," Collins said finally. "We'll hold till then." Sarah shook her head. "They'll target the LZ. You can't risk everyone for me." Collins' jaw clenched. "You're part of this team." "I'm the reason they're dying." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Reed said quietly, "She's right." Collins turned sharply. "Reed." "If she stays," he said, "they'll just keep coming." Collins's eyes met Sarah's, hard, calculating, but not cold. "If you walk out there, they'll kill you." Sarah nodded. "Then let me choose how." The decision came faster than anyone wanted. The gunfire was getting closer. The base perimeter was collapsing. Sarah moved to the ammo table, refilled her mags, and slung her med kit over her shoulder. Reed caught her arm. "You don't have to prove anything." She looked at him, really looked. "I'm not proving, I'm protecting." "Sarah." She smiled faintly. "You do the same for me." He didn't argue. He just pulled a small medal from his vest pocket, tarnished, scuffed, its ribbon half torn. "What's this?" she asked. "Something I kept from my first deployment," he said. "For luck." She hesitated. "You sure?" He pressed it into her hand. "I owe you one, call it even." Then he turned back to the fight, yelling orders as she slipped away into the dark. Outside the wire, the desert swallowed her. Gunfire echoed behind her, then faded. The only sound left was the wind. Sarah moved low and fast, heart pounding, every sense sharpened. She knew what she was doing was insane. But she also knew it was right. If she drew the attackers away, the others might live. And if she didn't come back, well, medics weren't meant to come back from everything. She reached the ridge line overlooking the valley. Lights flickered below, movement. At least a dozen hostiles, maybe more. She dropped to one knee, checked her weapon, exhaled. Then she fired. A single burst into the night. The answering roar of gunfire lit up the sand. "Come on," she whispered. "Come and find me." They did. The chase stretched across the dunes, fire and shadows, the hiss of bullets carving through air. Sarah moved like a ghost, every step deliberate. She ducked behind rocks, shifted angles, drew them farther from the base. She was running on instinct now, pain forgotten, fear burned out. Somewhere in the distance, she heard helicopters approaching, reinforcements. Good, that meant Collins and the others would make it. Then a voice echoed through the darkness, distorted, male, speaking in broken English. "Mitchell, you run far, but not far enough." She froze. He was closer than she thought. She turned too late. A flash. A sound. And then impact. The bullet hit her shoulder, spinning her backward into the sand. She gasped, breath torn from her chest. Her weapon fell. The world tilted. Through blurred vision, she saw the man approach, tall, masked, rifle raised. "This for my brothers," he said. Sarah's hand groped blindly, not for her gun, but for the flare in her vest pocket. She pulled the pin. A burst of white light exploded into the sky. The man staggered, momentarily blinded. And from above, salvation descended, the distant thump of rotors, growing louder, closer. She smiled weakly, too slow. Then she blacked out. When Sarah woke, everything was light and silence. White ceilings, the faint beeping of monitors, the sterile smell of antiseptic. Her first thought was, not again. Her second, I'm alive. "Good to see you finally joined us," a familiar voice said. Collins stood by the bedside, arms folded, face unreadable. "You pulled quite the stunt," she said. "You lured an entire strike team away from base. We found 8 dead hostiles and 3 wounded. The rest ran when the choppers arrived." Sarah's throat felt dry. "The others?" "Alive," Collins said, "because of you." Sarah sank back against the pillow, eyes closing briefly. Collins stepped closer, voice lowering. "You should know something. That transmitter you found, we traced it. It was planted before the Syria op. Someone inside leaked our coordinates." Sarah's eyes opened. "Someone inside Delta." Collins nodded. "We're still investigating, but whoever it is, they wanted you exposed." Sarah frowned. "Why me?" Collins looked at her for a long time before answering. "Because you're dangerous, Mitchell." Sarah almost laughed. "I'm a medic." Collins smiled faintly. "Exactly. You make people believe in something this world's been trying to kill for years, decency, and that scares them." She paused, then said quietly, "Get some rest. You're not done yet." That night, when the lights dimmed and the ward fell silent, Sarah stared at the ceiling and thought of the words Collins had said. "You make people believe." She hadn't set out to be anyone's symbol. She just wanted to help, to heal, to do her job. But somewhere between pain and purpose, between orders and conscience, she'd found something deeper. A truth that had no rank or flag. That courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the choice to face it again and again for someone else. She closed her eyes, the faint hum of life support monitors blending with her heartbeat. And though her body ached, her spirit felt light. Because somewhere out there, she knew the fight wasn't over. But neither was she. The hardest part of recovery wasn't the pain. It was the stillness. For weeks, Sarah Mitchell lay in the medical bay, her shoulder bound in gauze, her body healing, but her mind refusing to rest. Pain she could handle, she made peace with that long ago. But silence left too much room for memory. The faces, the screams, the smell of smoke and blood. And above it all, that voice in the dark. You run far, but not far enough. She'd heard it every night since. And she knew whoever said it wasn't gone. The day she was cleared for light duty, the base looked different. Same walls, same desert, same hum of generators. But something in the air had changed. People moved faster, talked less, looked over their shoulders more. Delta Force had always been built on trust, unspoken, unbreakable. Now that trust had cracks. Sarah could feel it. When she walked into the mess hall, conversations stopped. Heads turned, then looked away. She didn't blame them. The rumors had spread about the transmitter, about how the attackers had known her location, about how the unit she'd nearly died to save had been compromised from the inside. To them, she wasn't just the medic anymore. She was the variable. The question no one wanted to ask out loud. Collins called her in that evening. The colonel stood by a dimly lit briefing table, files scattered across it like shrapnel. "Sit," she said quietly. Sarah did. Collins didn't look up immediately. She was reading a document, jaw tight, eyes cold. When she finally spoke, her voice was controlled, too controlled. "We found our leak." Sarah's chest tightened. "Who?" Collins hesitated. "Reed." The name hit like a punch. "That's impossible," Sarah said. Collins slid the file across the table. Satellite logs, comms traffic, encrypted transmissions, all traced back to his device. He was feeding intel to an outside handler for weeks. Sarah shook her head. "Reed wouldn't, he saved my life." Collins' eyes softened. Maybe he didn't know what he was part of. Maybe he thought it was sanctioned. Maybe he thought it would protect you. Sarah stared at her, words caught in her throat. "Protect me." Collins exhaled. "Whoever orchestrated this used him. We traced the handler's code name, Iron Falcon. Ring any bells?" The name froze Sarah's blood. It was an old call sign, one she hadn't heard since before Delta. Her father's, Colonel William Mitchell. The world tilted. Sarah's breath caught. "That's impossible. My father's retired, he's not." "Retired doesn't mean uninvolved," Collins said softly. "He's been consulting for strategic command, intel oversight. He has access to everything, including Delta operations." Sarah stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. "You think my father tried to get me killed?" "I think someone used his access," Collins said. "But whether he knew or not, we don't have proof." Sarah's voice cracked. "So what do you want me to do?" Collins met her eyes. "Find out." That night, Sarah sat alone in her quarters, staring at the torn medic patch framed on the wall, the one her father had ripped from her shoulder months ago at Condor. The memory felt like another lifetime. Back then, she thought the worst thing he could do was doubt her. Now she wasn't sure what to believe. The military ran on trust, but family ran on faith. And she was losing both. She opened her encrypted comm link and scrolled to an old contact. W. Mitchell, Ret. Her thumb hovered over the send button. Then she pressed it. The screen flickered. Static. Then his face appeared, older, worn, but unmistakably him. "Sarah," he said quietly, "it's been a while." Her throat tightened. "You knew I'd call. I hoped you wouldn't have to." The way he said it, calm, careful, made her heart drop. "Did you authorize data transfers to an external handler?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower. "Sarah, there are things happening above your clearance level, layers of operations you're not supposed to see." "That's not an answer," she said. He sighed. "You think this is about you. It's bigger than that. Your team is part of a long-term intelligence chain. Sometimes data leaks are engineered to expose the real threat." Sarah's hands clenched. "So you did leak intel." "To catch who's behind the insurgent funding," he said. "We used your unit as bait." Her heart stopped. "You used me." "Not you," he said quickly. "The network that targeted you. You were the only one they'd come for directly." Her voice trembled. "You turned me into a target." "It was controlled, contained. People died." He flinched. "Sarah." "No," she said, her tone sharp. "You always said soldiers don't get to choose their wars, but you chose mine." The silence that followed was long and unbearable. When he finally spoke again, his voice broke just slightly. "Sometimes, to save lives, you have to sacrifice pieces of your soul." Sarah stared at him, eyes hard. "Then you've already lost yours." She cut the link. The next morning, she went straight to Collins. "He admitted it," Sarah said. "They used us as bait, me specifically." Collins didn't look surprised. "I suspected as much." Sarah frowned. "And you didn't tell me." "I couldn't," Collins said. "Command authorization." "So everyone knew but me." "No, only a handful. But yes, we suspected the insurgents had an inside source feeding them data through a controlled channel." Sarah's voice shook. "You let them come for us." "We controlled the damage," Collins said. "You survived. The mission succeeded." "That's not success," Sarah snapped. "That's manipulation." Collins' tone stayed level. "Welcome to Black Operations, Lieutenant. The line between strategy and betrayal isn't as clear as you want it to be." Sarah turned away, fists clenched. "You sound like him." "I'm not him," Collins said quietly. "I still remember what it's like to care who gets caught in the crossfire." Sarah didn't respond. Because in that moment, she didn't know which truth hurt more, that her father had used her, or that her commander had let him. That night, Sarah sat outside the hangar again, the same place where months ago she'd watched the desert burn. But this time, she wasn't waiting for orders. She was waiting for clarity. The stars stretched above her, cold, indifferent witnesses to human conflict. Reed joined her, limping slightly, his arm in a sling. "Word travels fast," he said softly. She didn't answer. "They said your old man was behind it." She nodded. "He said it was for a greater good." Reed gave a tired laugh. "They always say that, doesn't make the ghosts quieter." They sat in silence for a while. Then Sarah asked quietly, "You ever feel like the uniform weighs more every year?" "Every day," he said, "but you wear it anyway, because someone gotta remember what it's supposed to stand for." She looked at him, at the bruises, the scars, the calm in his eyes. "Why do you stay, Reed?" she asked. He thought about it for a moment. "Because somewhere out there, someone's gonna bleed for something stupid, and I'd rather it be me than them." She smiled faintly. "That's not stupid." "No," he said, "it's human." The following morning, Sarah stood in the operations room, staring at a new mission file on the monitor. The objective line read simply, "Iron Falcon Asset Retrieval." Her father's name. Her father's operation. Her father's endgame. Collins entered quietly. Command wants us to extract him. He's gone dark, no comms for 72 hours. Sarah didn't turn. You think he ran? I think he realized the machine he built finally turned on him. Sarah looked at her. You want me on this mission? Yes, Collins said, because no one understands him like you do. Sarah stared at the glowing map, coordinates deep in the Hindu Kush Mountains. The place where her father's career had begun. And maybe where hers would end. That night she packed in silence. Every piece of gear felt heavier, every motion slower. Reed appeared at her door. You sure about this? Sarah nodded. If I don't go, someone else will, and they won't ask why he did it, they'll just pull the trigger. Reed studied her. You're not going there to arrest him, are you? She met his gaze. I'm going to find out who he became. He didn't stop her. He just handed her back the medal she'd carried since the night of the attack. You might need that again, he said. She closed her fist around it, the metal cold against her palm. And as she walked toward the hangar, the engines already warming for flight, she whispered, not to Reed, not to Collins, not even to herself, but to the ghosts that never left her. This isn't about orders anymore. The rotors spun, dust rising around her like smoke. It's about truth. The mountains were older than memory. They rose like stone ghosts against a slate sky, silent, cold, and waiting. Somewhere inside that silence was her father. And the answers she wasn't sure she wanted. The helicopter dropped her, and 2 operators on a frozen ridge at dawn. Thin air, thin light, every breath felt like glass. Signals faint, Ramirez said, scanning his tracker. Last ping from a ravine half a click east. Sarah nodded. We go quiet from here. They moved single file, snow crunching under boots, wind howling through the pass. The world felt stripped of color, white, gray, the black line of their shadows stretching forward. No radio chatter, no sound but the wind. Just the weight of what waited ahead. They found the first clue at the base of the ravine, a burned-out comms pack half buried in snow. Next to it, boot prints, one set. Still fresh. He's alive, Ramirez whispered. Sarah didn't answer. Her chest ached not from the climb but from what that truth meant. Because part of her wanted him dead already. Dead men couldn't explain betrayal. By midday, they reached the mouth of an old Soviet-era outpost carved into the mountain rock. Dark entrance, rusted gate, the kind of place where history and ghosts slept side by side. Ramirez checked his rifle. You sure he's in there? Sarah exhaled. He always loved high ground. They breached quiet, deliberate, no words. Inside, the air was colder. Each footstep echoed down concrete halls lined with peeling paint and forgotten propaganda. Sarah led, flashlight cutting through dust. Then a sound. Metal scraping. She signaled stop, aimed low. A shadow shifted at the end of the corridor. Hold, she whispered. The light swept forward and froze on a familiar face. Gray hair, weathered features, eyes she'd seen every day in the mirror. Her father. Hands raised. No weapon. Sarah, he said softly. Ramirez aimed instantly. Hands where I can see them. It's all right, Sarah said quietly. Stand down. Ramirez hesitated, then lowered his rifle, backing toward the door to cover their flank. Father and daughter stood facing each other in the half-light, the air thick with history. You shouldn't have come, he said. You shouldn't have run. He gave a faint, tired smile. You sound like your mother. Sarah's throat tightened. You used me. You turned my team into bait. He didn't deny it. He just looked older, smaller. I tried to stop them, he said. The higher chain. They wanted a live target, something to draw out the funding network. I told them it was too dangerous. And when they ignored you? I let it happen, he said, Because I thought I could control it. She laughed, bitter, broken. You controlled nothing. You turned your daughter into collateral. He stepped closer. You survived. That's not the point. Her voice echoed off the stone walls, raw and trembling. You taught me that soldiers don't gamble with lives. You taught me that honor matters more than orders. So what happened, Dad? He looked down, hands shaking. I forgot why I started. The words hung there, soft but heavy. He turned, motioning toward an open crate on the table, hard drives, encrypted devices, maps. This, he said, is everything, funding routes, shell corporations, names that don't exist. The people pulling the strings don't wear uniforms. They sell wars like currency. He met her eyes. If you hand this over, they'll bury it. And you? Sarah frowned. Then why bring it here? Because I couldn't trust anyone else. You can't even trust yourself. He smiled sadly. That's why I called you. She froze. You called me. He nodded. Encrypted relay to Delta Command. Collins doesn't know I masked the source. But when you were attacked at the base, I realized they'd found me through you. I tried to end it before they reached you. Her heart pounded. You started the fire, then tried to put it out. I was trying to protect you. No, she said quietly. You were trying to protect your legacy. The words landed like a blade. For a moment, neither moved. Then the sound of engines. Ramirez shouted from the tunnel. Movement, multiple contacts. Her father's eyes widened. They found us. Sarah raised her rifle. How? They've been tracking me since I went dark. Ramirez's voice crackled over comms. At least 8 hostiles, closing fast. Sarah turned to her father. You armed? He shook his head. Left it behind. I wasn't planning to fight. She tossed him a sidearm. Plans change. The battle came like an avalanche. Bullets tore through concrete. Sparks danced in the dark. Sarah and Ramirez returned fire, covering each other with machine precision. Her father stayed low, reloading clumsily, breathing hard. Fall back, she yelled, to the storage bay. They moved deeper into the bunker, firing, moving, breathing in rhythm. Sarah's body remembered what training had burned into her. Stay alive, protect, adapt. But part of her mind kept whispering, he caused this. When the last echo of gunfire faded, 4 hostiles lay still. 3 more regrouped outside. We're boxed in, Ramirez said. Only one exit left, the shaft. Sarah glanced at her father. You go first. He shook his head. No, the data goes first. He grabbed the crate, heaved it toward her. Take it. I'm not leaving without you. Sarah, you don't get to decide that anymore. Before he could argue, a grenade clattered into the corridor. Ramirez dove shouting down. The explosion ripped through the room. Dust, smoke, silence. When Sarah's vision cleared, Ramirez was down, alive, bleeding, stunned. Her father was on the ground too, motionless, blood spreading across his chest. No. She crawled to him, hands trembling. The wound was deep, too deep. He tried to speak but coughed instead. Don't talk, she said, pressing down. His hand caught hers weakly. You always were stubborn. Save your strength. He shook his head. Listen, that drive, don't give it to them. Not Delta, not Command, they'll erase it. Promise me. She stared at him, tears blurring her vision. Dad. Promise. She swallowed. I promise. He exhaled, slow, final. And then, just like that, he was gone. For a long time, Sarah didn't move. The mountain seemed to hold its breath with her. Then she closed his eyes, the way she'd done for countless soldiers before him. No words, no prayer. Just a silence that felt like mercy. She rose, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and grabbed the data drive. Outside, the wind screamed down the valley. She slung her rifle, helped Ramirez to his feet, and whispered, Let's go home. Hours later, back at base, Collins met her on the tarmac. No words at first, just that long, unreadable look between commander and soldier. Finally, Collins said, "Report." Sarah handed her the crate. "Mission complete, Colonel William Mitchell, KIA." Collins accepted the report silently, and the data. Sarah hesitated, compromised in the blast. Collins studied her for a beat too long, as if hearing the lie beneath the calm. Then she nodded, understood. As Sarah turned to leave, Collins said softly, "He was a complicated man." Sarah stopped. No, he was simple. He just forgot that complicated people need simple truths. Collins said nothing more. That night Sarah sat alone in the hangar, same bench, same patch of desert wind. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small drive, dented, cracked, but intact. Her father's last burden. She stared at it for a long time, then slipped it into an envelope addressed to Independent Oversight Commission, confidential. Truth didn't need applause. It just needed to survive. She sealed it, placed it in the outbox, and walked away. When dawn broke, the horizon burned gold across the desert. The air smelled of dust and diesel, and somewhere in the distance a helicopter lifted, carrying the sound of engines that never stopped. Reed found her there, sitting on the steps, watching the sunrise. "You look lighter," he said. She smiled faintly. "Maybe I finally let something go." He sat beside her. "You gonna tell me what happened up there?" She shook her head. "No, some stories aren't meant to be told. They're meant to be lived and left behind." They sat in silence for a while. Finally Reed asked, "So what now?" Sarah looked at the rising sun, the same one that had risen over Condor, over every battlefield she'd ever crossed. "Now," she said softly, "I start over." He nodded. "You think you can?" She smiled. "I have to." In the distance, a new batch of recruits assembled on the field, young, nervous. Sarah watched them with quiet pride, the same fear, the same hope she'd once carried. Collins stood beside her. "You staying on as advisor?" "For a while," Sarah said. "Someone needs to teach them what the manuals don't." "And what's that?" Sarah glanced toward the recruits, then back at the horizon. "That courage isn't about who fires first," she said. "It's about who still has a heart left when it's over." Collins nodded slowly. "He'd be proud of you." Sarah's eyes softened. "Maybe, but I think he'd finally understand me." As the morning light spread across the base, Sarah adjusted the medic patch on her shoulder, the same patch that had once been torn away. Now it sat there steady, earned whole. She took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, and whispered, not to the past, not to the ghosts, but to herself. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The camera of memory pulled wide. A figure in desert fatigues, standing alone against the rising sun. One hand resting on the insignia over her heart. The wind carrying a single, quiet promise through the sand. That as long as someone remembers what mercy feels like, humanity isn't lost.